This is the Rat Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
Food for 5 years. 1,000 gallons of gas. Air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is June the 6th, 2023. This is episode 320 of Workshop Radio. How is everyone out there? I know this is an odd evening. Ryan did me a huge favor when I accidentally double booked on Saturday. He's a good dude all around. We're going to have him on in a minute. We're going to talk about the trouble with troubleshooting. It'll be a good time. So let's get the announcements out of the way, and then we'll bring him right on. So first off, guys, there's a member of the workshop community, the greater TSP community, who just launched a website. He did exactly what he said he was going. Podcast, not a website. He already had one. Matthew Sursley, if you know him, the agorist attorney, or the agorist tax advisor. He's a good dude, an absolute intelligent, unbelievably smart guy. And he just started a new podcast called It Depends. So give him some love. I threw the link in all the places so you guys can check him out. He's got 4 episodes out already. And he told me he was going to have 3 before the end of May. And he sent me a brag email the other day saying he did exactly that. And for what it's worth, Matthew, I'm proud of you. And get out there and give him a workshop hug, guys. Number 2, actually a couple things. So we've got kind of a weird schedule. I've got extra shows this week, even though I told you there'd be no shows on Saturday. And here we go. So anyway, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock Mountain Time, I've got Jeff Donaldson of Preparedness Labs coming on. It's going to be a great episode. He's a fellow Canuck out of Ontario. He has a podcast, blog, Instagram channel, and he runs a company called Preparedness Labs, where they do preparedness, what's the word for it? Like preparedness audits for bigger businesses. It's going to be a fun time. I made this contact through George, who came on that did the Last House Standing documentary, so I appreciate that. And number 3, Thursday, it's going to be 2 shows kind of. So at 5:30 Mountain Time, I'm going to be running the bi-weekly Self-Reliance Festival live stream. Not sure who's going to be my guest yet. I'm sure there'll be lots of people coming on, but we're running that. And then at 7 o'clock, I have my brother from another mother, Mr. Sean Mills. He's a resident solar expert and also a top breeder of attack rabbits. So if you want to hear everything he knows about battery technology, solar, and everything else, it's about time he came on the show. So we have him Thursday night. And finally, guys, today's tool. 'Tis the season. If you spring a leak in your hot tub, inflatable hot tub or swimming pool, and you don't want to drain it to patch it, I've been using Grella Patch and Seal underwater tape for a long time. This stuff is awesome. Just don't stick it to your face because you'll get a bikini wax if you do. So link is in the description. And with that, guys, let's slide on over to our guest this evening, Mr. Ryan Steva. Where are you? Hey, sir, how are you?
Good. How are you, Tim?
Not bad at all. Good to have you, brother.
Thanks. I'm glad to be on.
Yeah, it's long overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did a collaborative video a while ago, but
you beat me to it. I was just gonna say this is way back. I think I was only maybe doing content for 3 or 4 months. I remember I kind of launched the channel in February, and I think it was around April. I reached out to a bunch of other creators, and I said, "Hey, Ryan, do you want to be part of this?" I think it was what your favorite tool was or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And you were gracious enough to send me some content, and I always appreciated that, man. That was fun. It was 7 or 8 of us that did it all together.
I think I cheated and threw 2 tools in there, but
yes, you did. But you got it in under your time limit. I'd rather have more content, but on time than anything else. So
yeah.
So, yeah, Ryan, introduce yourself to us, man. Some of us will know you, but who are you? Where are you from? We got a tradition around here. What was your very first job for pay, or even not for pay? But I always love to hear it. So,
sure. Well, I think my first official job was working at Camp Randall Stadium.
Okay.
That's for the Badgers in Madison, Tennessee, or Madison, Wisconsin. So I did that. That was my first official paid thing that I did. And I got like a cut of the Coke that I sold, basically.
Like drinking Coke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure we were on the same page there, brother.
Yeah, I was 13, so I wasn't aware of the other
Good
kind
man.
of Coke yet. But yeah, I worked anytime I could before that as well, get some spending money. And so I had a lot of unofficial jobs before that, including mowing the lawn for my grandparents and such.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So
What was your other question?
Madison? Oh, tell us a little bit about you. So you grew up in Madison, did you?
Yeah, I grew up near Madison, Wisconsin, in a little town called DeForest.
Okay.
Really enjoyed it in the area. If you got up just a little bit further north, it's really beautiful, and there's tons of outdoor stuff to do. So I grew up doing outdoor things and building things and breaking things and dumpster diving for things that I thought I could fix, stuff like that. So, yeah.
Do you ever remember anything good that you dumpster dove that was an extra treasure to you?
I think most of my bikes were like a Mod Podge of bikes that I pulled out of the trash and put together.
Nice.
So that treated me pretty well, except I remember a time when I built a bike and the crankshaft was way too long. And so I went around a corner and it caught on the ground and I went flying.
Oh, no.
Yeah, there's a few other mishaps, but that was the biggest one as far as building my own bikes. But yeah, we pulled all kinds of stuff out. I had a bunk bed for a long time. The first video game system I ever got was an NES.
Yeah.
Because when you like latch it, when you push it down, it's supposed to click and it didn't. So I don't know. I made some rudimentary thing to make it latch, and I got my first video game system that way.
I remember I had one. I stuck some cardboard or a stick or whatever it took to keep it down, you know?
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I had like a shim or something like that I was shoving in there.
That's cool. An NES today, if you found one in the dumpster, it'd be worth a pretty penny.
Yeah, I think so.
So were you, did you go to public school, homeschool?
I was homeschooled throughout I think second grade through the rest of middle school, and then I went to a private school for high school.
Nice.
So, yeah, it's back when like only weirdos were homeschooled. You know, like the kids who didn't fit in or whatever. For me, it was really more that I was kind of dyslexic and struggled to read, and so I needed an environment that was more conducive to, not having to be pushed quite so fast to learn how to read. And that was really important. And it gave me a certain amount of freedom that I'm really grateful for.
Did you guys do any homesteading or gardening or anything as a kid? Or
So we had goats, but they were mostly just pets.
Okay.
And we had chickens when I was really little, which I loved. We had garden periodically, so it's kind of on and off. That area of Wisconsin is super fertile, so you plant anything and pretty much it'll grow. Not a real long growing season, but if you planted it, it would usually do okay. So yeah, we did some of that. We had 7 acres. My dad's a mechanic, and so we always had like some car that somebody gave him for free that we drive around out in the field. We got Subarus on occasion, so we'd like tow tubes and other dangerous things behind it, like behind a boat, but it was on the snow. So we did all kinds of fun stuff. We had space and did adventures, and I got to build pretty much anything. I got to be dangerous. In fact, recently I learned that my cousins dubbed my brother and I the Danger Cousins. So
that's awesome. Who wouldn't want to be called that?
Exactly. I'm like, I'll take that.
That's fun. What was the deadliest thing you ever built or contraption, do you think?
We built all kinds of like crazy slingshot type things. I think we got a hold of some like medical rubber, rubber tubes, and built stuff with that. Beyond that, we built snow forts.
Yeah.
So we had this long driveway, and my dad would plow it with the tractor and dump the snow. So we'd have these like 10, 15 foot tall piles of snow, and we'd dig forts into the middle of them. And I can imagine that's really dangerous. Like they could collapse at any point. And then, we had a 3-story tree fort that was like 35, 40 feet in the air was the 3rd story. Dude. And a small wind came along one time and blew it down.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah.
So how'd you go from, growing up, tobogganing behind a Subaru in Madison to being a Homestead? Is it Homestead Consultant? Is that what you call it?
Yeah. It's thehomesteadconsultant.com. So I took it because that was the URL that was available.
Nice.
Plus, do what you say what you do, all that. But yeah. It's a good question. So I had a health crisis in my 20s, and that really kind of was the catalyst for me. You hear a lot of people kind of start, there's like, they get that one thing and there's just a snowball, like they go down the full rabbit hole, and they for me, it was basically, I'll spare people the full story at this point, but, when I went through the medical system to try to deal with what I was dealing with, I went to the Mayo and they gave me absolutely atrociously bad advice, like around every single corner. Because by the time I had gotten there, I'd figured out how to mostly deal with the issue I was having on my own by some research and teaching myself how to read like medical papers and things. Mm-hmm. So by the time I got there, I knew what I needed to do, and I was doing it, and I got given really, really bad advice. And so it's, I've always kind of questioned the way things are, the way we're told things should be. But when I had that happen, there was this shift because, I'd grown up fairly conservative, and there's at the time, a big push for like, medical companies or pharmaceutical companies should be getting profits from the things they invent, and basically a lot of defense of how big pharma worked.
Sure.
And I kind of bought into it, at least in part. And at this point I had realized that it's broken. Our medical system is broken. The pharmaceutical industry is broken. And that kind of started the ball rolling with, I guess also our farming systems are broken, and our government systems are broken, and kind of all of that started to just snowball. So I started to realize I needed to eat differently, which I did. Tried my own garden, and the first year was absolute utter failure. And then researched, and that was right around the time we moved to Tennessee.
Okay.
So the next year, I was at my house in Tennessee and able to put in a garden, and it went really, really well. I used kind of a combination of different techniques, including like back to Eden gardening, which was the first thing that I had really come across that resonated with me, and lasagna gardening and things. And so we did a little 10 by 10. And it went so well, I expanded it, and I just kept expanding it and expanding it. And now it's really hilly here, which you probably know, Tim.
A little bit now. Yeah.
So I've had to do terraces to expand it further because it's a bit on a hillside.
Sure.
Then we got chickens, and I started to plant out an orchard. And somewhere along the way, I learned about permaculture, which I kind of learned I was doing, but realized I could function stack a lot more. So I started adding things, and my orchard became, instead of 4 fruit trees, it became 6 fruit trees, and then ground layer and bush layers and vining things and berries and all kinds of things mixed in, and herbaceous layers and comfrey planted everywhere. And now it's I think pretty much 4 years after I planted most of it, and it's just like this absolutely amazing little orchard kind of getaway spot. Then I realized, crap rolls downhill, right? And so
Sure.
Below my chicken coop, I was just wasting all the fertility that ended up, kind of going downhill. Most of it I figured out how to capture to put in my garden, but some of it still ends up downhill. So now I'm doing like a little like gabion wall with with trees and berry bushes and all kinds of other stuff on contour. So as the water flows down, it hits that gabion wall, or the kind of like a retaining wall on contour, and spreads out, and all that fertility gets spread out to all my plants going downhill.
That's cool. So that's like, that's like a supercharged swale almost, or kind of a step down from it. Like kind of contains it a little bit, but it also brings the nutrients from the chickens.
Yeah, in some ways it's a step down from a swale because it really allows the water through more quickly than a swale would.
Okay.
But what happens is, because I have chickens and because in their run I put a ton of wood chips and things, those wood chips just kind of stack up, and they'll kick them out and kind of through the fence downhill. Okay. And so the wood chips then get stuck in the partially broken down wood chips get stuck in this retaining wall, and they help slow the water more. And so the rocks, basically, I stack the rocks up above the soil level so that all the stuff running down basically gets caught and builds up and creates its own kind of swale.
That's cool. So you got all that natural material, organic material that's collecting there, and the more you add water to it, sun gets on, it's going to break down a little bit, and you took a lot of the work out of it, didn't you?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a big thing for me, is making sure that I have, I work a lot. I've got multiple businesses. I'm not home a lot, so I need my systems to do the work for me as much as possible. And that orchard I was talking about, the first one, it's matured to the point where I go through and mow it every couple of weeks. But beyond that, it doesn't take much interaction. My kids and my wife just get to go out and pick fruit from it.
Nice.
But things like making sure that I'll put it this way, I don't turn compost. I think it's a waste of my time.
Sure.
But I want compost, so I use my chickens to make compost.
Okay.
So within the run, I put wood chips, which, wood chips are high in carbon. They've got a lot of end grain on them, so they soak up nitrogen and ammonia really fast. So my chicken coop doesn't smell, my chicken run doesn't smell. They're not walking around in, sloppy mud. And then everything that we don't eat gets thrown to the chickens, even if it's something they don't eat, like a lemon or an onion or something. Eventually it'll break down, and they do the job for me. They scratch and turn everything over constantly, looking for bugs and things.
Nice.
So once a year, I go in. I use a little, a little mesh, hardware cloth, over my wheelbarrow. Take out about 10 to 20 loads of wheelbarrows full of compost that my chickens made for me over to the garden.
That's awesome. And then, of course, that water, nutrients, is coming out of the compost and going down the hill as well.
Right. Yep.
Dude, that's cool.
Yeah, and there's so many things you can function stack. You've probably seen, I think Nicole Sauce is doing a victory garden that you may have seen at the workshop. But the idea is you can take what I just talked about, where the chickens turn the compost, and you can also have them weed your garden and fertilize your garden and compost in place, so you don't have to move it.
Okay.
Because my land is sloped the way it is, and I don't really have a flat spot, it doesn't function well for that system. But if you combine what I was just talking about with a victory garden, man, that's everything your starter homesteader needs. It's you're going to have much better water retention. You'll have compost that you're making. You'll have chickens and eggs. You'll have your garden's a lot easier. Your garden's a lot more fertile. Like it's like everything you can think of. And then if you just basically, if you set up a really simple water catchment system, then you can have water that maybe is uphill a little bit from there, and gravity feeds for your chickens and for your garden. So you can put all those four systems, chicken, water, compost, and garden, all in one spot all together, and have basically the thing that everybody wants as a homesteader to get started all compacted into one space, and have your work reduced because the chickens are doing most of the work for you.
So you got multiple businesses, did you say?
Yes.
So what do you do?
So I'm a home inspector is my primary business. And that's part of, hence the troubleshooting and like figuring things out.
Yeah.
And then I also, about a year ago now, started doing the Homestead Consultant. Because when I started the business home inspecting, I didn't have enough to make ends meet. So I was helping friends and family set up like mini farms and permaculture systems and things like that kind of on the side. And I realized I was really good at it. I was really good at designing them and coming up with ways to make things simpler for people. So people who are even really busy could get good food from their own land.
Sure.
So I was like, well, why don't I monetize this? Because I can help more people if I'm getting paid consistently for it and I have a pay structure. So now I design systems for people. I come and help them talk through what would work best on their land, what their land would do best. It's been really fun to be able to be an entrepreneur and start businesses. I never expected to do that.
So how is the Homestead Consulting going? Is it starting to pay the bills a bit?
Yeah, it's absolutely helping. It's going well. I think I can make more money just going straight home inspector, but I love the
Sure.
I love the Homestead Consulting so much that I'm okay with that. But yeah, I've got several consultations per week, most weeks, and I do quite a few designs. I try to, in my design, what I try to do is I try to do like an overhead layout so that people can actually, it's like an interactive map. I take a map of their property and have an interactive system where they can click on things and see descriptions, and it's kind of drawn out on their property. And then I also do a write-up that has, step 1, step 2, step 3 to help people avoid a lot of the pitfalls that people tend to make when they're starting homesteading, like getting animals before you have fencing or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
So, it's really, the word's escaping me, but it's a blessing to me, and it is to others as well, I think, to be able to help them. And since it's so local for me, I'm able to connect people.
Yes.
So if I have a client who's, let's say, raising sheep, and another client who's really good at growing peppers, and they want to trade peppers for meat or whatever the thing is, or even just get to know each other so they have a common connection locally to be there if something doesn't go well. It's really cool to be able to build that kind of community locally.
Speaking of connections, I want to throw this out here before we. Andy says next time you're near Chattanooga, give me a shout. I think you have my number, but if not, Tactical Nicole or Nighthawk do. Yeah,
I have your number, Andy. It would be good to get together again soon.
What part of Tennessee are you in exactly?
I'm near Carthage.
Okay.
So if you're going from Nashville out towards Nicole's,
yep.
I'm about, you'd exit like 15 minutes before you would exit to get to her place.
So a couple of exits, 3-4 exits for Gordonsville, something like that?
Gordonsville exit, yeah.
That's where you take?
Yep, I'm just north of there.
Right on. Yeah, we stay in Gordonsville. So we had
cool.
Yeah. By the, I don't know. Anyway, right off the highway. That's where we normally stay. So yeah, I know the area really well. So
cool. I love it here. So are you disclosing the general location of your Tennessee property yet?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's like 45 minutes south of Camden, kind of it. So just straight south. We're going to be having a work day there, so everybody's going to, everybody will know. But yeah, it's cool. It's easy. It's just a straight run and one right turn. So But yeah, I'm excited. It'll be cool. We're going to be down. I haven't even told Carrie this yet, but I'm going to be in Knoxville, like near the 20th of August, something like that. So
nice.
I got to meet up with Carrie. So I'm saying that out loud now, Carrie, so I don't forget. And
he's in that area.
Yeah.
We trade information fairly often, and if people are looking for consults or whatever in that area, I like to point them towards him because, there's no point in me driving 2.5 hours when he's right there.
Absolutely. That's the way our communities work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to look at any of these people as competition, right? Like, Carrie does great work. There's other people I know on the other side of Nashville that do great work. Like, there's no point in being, I mean, maybe a little friendly competition, sure. But, man, we've got such a great community of people who want to do things and really honestly just want to help other people out that, I have no issue recommending other people as well.
So when you reached out to me, you said you wanted to come on and talk about troubleshooting, which I was excited about because I've learned a lot about troubleshooting over the years. But I did a preparedness presentation at Thrivalist Fair, and there's a whole section in there about becoming better at troubleshooting. And the biggest thing is by learning.
Yeah.
And I figured, hey, I would love to have Ryan on because I bet you I'll learn a whole hell of a lot from him. So where do you want to start with the troubleshooting end of things? Do you, I guess, where'd you get your, I mean, you kind of talked a little bit about where life led you, but where did you get kind of your, cut your teeth on troubleshooting, that sort of thing?
Sure. So yeah, I talked a little bit about growing up and dumpster diving and things like that, where I just had a kind of a knack for it and enjoyed it. My family wasn't wealthy by any means. So, being able to find something and fix it was something I oftentimes wouldn't have had, like the Nintendo.
Right.
So that was part of it. It was, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Or goes something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
We all knew what you meant either way. Don't worry.
So growing up that way, it was encouraged too with my dad being a mechanic.
Sure.
We always had cars that we got inexpensively because they needed repair. We lived on wood heat, so we had to figure out ways to always make that work. So it was always a thing, trying to figure out how to do something in a way that maybe we otherwise couldn't. So in that sense, there's a bit of troubleshooting, just in like, how do you travel cheaper with a big family, right? You've got to troubleshoot for that. It's, well, maybe we'll figure out how to camp. State parks back then, very few people used them. So it was like $5 a night or something to go to a campsite and have, bathrooms and a shower close. So in one sense that was troubleshooting. And then, when I got out of college, it was like middle of the recession. And so I took a job as a cable technician, for basically it's kind of like Comcast, Coach-A-Go, company like that, but smaller. Yep. And I realized that I really enjoyed troubleshooting, like figuring out what the problem was, especially if other technicians had been out there and, couldn't resolve it. I got a kick out of being able to figure out what it was that was going wrong. And so I started kind of putting a formula to it in my head. Like, okay, how do I explain to other technicians how I'm doing this so they can do the same thing? So I've always kind of looked at things that way, but then I've also really had a heart for teaching other people to do the same, because, rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah, man.
Or lifts all boats.
Yeah, both.
Something like that. And I just, there's something about helping people. And I worked in that company. I worked with a lot of people who really were set on making other technicians, other people look dumb or look like they didn't know what they were doing. And bringing a different culture to that work environment was actually pretty cool to get to do.
So you talked about that formula. I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead in what you wanted to talk about, but can you share a bit of that formula? Because I'd like to hear that.
Sure. So I try to break it down into a few different categories, where I start and then where I end up. Basically, I try to start with information gathering. I look at the system and I think about what's going on, like what the problem is, what the person's describing, and then think about what are the things that make this happen. So you can try to isolate it, but the first thing I do before I try to do any of that is I just start asking questions.
Okay.
Like ask when, where, how long, under what circumstances is
Sure.
this issue happening. So you might think about, I don't know, how cold is it outside? Is it below freezing when this thing happens? And try to find those patterns and those correlations. One thing I would say also, though, is don't get stuck on them. I see a lot of people who are new to troubleshooting or just don't do it very often. They'll find a correlation that has no meaning, and they'll get really stuck on it. Like every time it happens, it's at night. And then you start asking questions, and you're like, well, are you home during the day? No, I'm not home during the day. Okay. Well, how do you know if it's happening during the day or not?
That's great. Sure.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by don't get stuck on or attached to the pattern that you're seeing. But do look for the patterns. One thing I say to people getting started, and this is the same with like permaculture design, is look at somebody else's problem. Like if you're driving down the road and you're like, that person's fence is terrible. Why is it terrible? And then start thinking about, okay, what would I do to fix it? And the reason I say look at somebody else's problem is you're not attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think about, at least in that moment, how much is it going to cost to fix it the right way? What's actually wrong with it? You're not offended because, it feels like an insult because you put your fence in wrong because it's somebody else's fence. So you get a chance to look at something and think about what you would do, how you would address it without having to, with taking all the emotional stuff out of it.
So that's kind of a good one. I really suck at getting stuck on things. I become, my blinders get on. I'm really good at thinking outside the box until I've made up my mind. And then all of a sudden I seem to lose the ability to get creative with troubleshooting. Do you know what I mean? Is there a way you can overcome that, or I don't know, knock it out of your head a little bit?
That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way, but there is definitely a psychological, I think it's kind of like normalcy bias.
Sure, yeah.
Like we perceive something some way and we couldn't possibly take in all the information around us if we didn't have some type of normalcy bias to filter all that through. And I do think that looking at somebody else's problem that's similar can shake you out of that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So yeah, even just looking up, going on Facebook, you don't respond to the comments, but look at people's questions. Like, how do I fix this? And Tim, you and I think are in like the same handyman mastermind group where people ask questions, and you can do searches in those groups, right? So you can go to the top, you can search for questions that have been answered or things that people have talked about. So if you're getting stuck on something, you might go and look at somebody else's problem. And before you read the comments on how people are suggesting to fix it, think about how you would approach it, because you can do it without being emotionally stuck on it.
I like that. Yeah. And sometimes all it takes is I like to take a breath once in a while. Sometimes I need to set something down for a day or two and come back to it. But that might be a really good way to short circuit that and maybe jump over needing to let it sit for a few days. You know?
No, and you make a great point too, though, because sometimes setting something down, your brain's doing the background computer thing, right? Where it's going, how do I? And then you sleep on it, and your brain kind of wipes clean all the dumb thoughts and tries to put the new ones together in kind of a subconscious way. So you wake up refreshed. This is a dumb example, but
it's all right.
Growing up, I wanted to learn how to juggle.
Okay.
You remember klutz books? They were popular in the 90s.
Okay.
For like how to do things. And so I got this book, and one of the things it suggested that was actually the most helpful was practice until you start getting worse at it, and then go to bed.
Sure.
And so your brain goes, like, basically you're working at something until your muscles and your brain aren't really working together anymore. And then when you go to bed, your brain basically puts all those things back together. And so your suggestion of putting it down for a while and coming back to it later is an excellent one.
Huh. That's cool. I like that a lot, actually. And that, yeah, there's something to be said about that. Just giving it some rest and letting your brain take over, because it's unreal the kind of stuff that your brain can come up with on autopilot. You know what I mean? It's way better than sitting there, anyway, getting mad at something on your workbench, right?
Right. Yeah, or like breaking something because you've got frustrated and you're trying to do it too fast.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I've done that. I'm like,
oh, yeah.
I'm repairing something and I'm like, screw this. I'm just going to see if I can do it faster. You don't take the time to do it right.
I don't know how many times I've thought, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to. And as soon as I do it, I'm hooped. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, I'm going to have to fix that with duct tape now, right?
Information gathering. Where do you go from there?
So after I've gathered the information, I like to try to narrow the possibilities or isolate the problem. One way of thinking about it is what's called divide and conquer. Okay. So if this works in general, but the easiest way to explain it is with a linear system. Okay. So let's use plumbing as an example. You've got a leak somewhere, you don't know where, but your water's running constantly. Well, if you put valves in the system, you probably want to start, generally speaking, in the middle. So you put a valve in the middle, you turn it off. Do you still have a leak? Well, no. Then the leak is past that valve. Yes. Sure. Then the leak is before that valve. So that's a really, really rudimentary way of thinking about it. But you're isolating the problem. So then you can kind of keep breaking it down and finding where or what circumstances create the problem. So even once you've isolated it, a lot of times you won't necessarily know the exact right fix, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute. But isolating the problem is a really important step. Trying to as much as you can pull out the variables. Okay. So that's kind of a scientific method. If you think of it, you're taking away the variables to test a hypothesis.
Right. It's literally the scientific method.
Yeah, exactly. So you may either formulate some type of hypothesis when you're doing this, like, I think that the leak is coming from the bathroom on the far side of the house. Okay. Or, we can test that by putting a valve in. There's other ways to test it too, but that's just a rudimentary way of explaining it. So now I have that hypothesis. Now I put a valve in that isolates that whole bathroom. Okay, now I know let's say it's the leak stopped. I know it is the bathroom now, but I don't know if it's the toilet or the sink or the bathtub. So that's one way of thinking about it is using the scientific method to pose a hypothesis. And then your next hypothesis might be, well, I can see the bathtub, I can see the shower, I can see the sinks, and they don't appear to be leaking. So unless they're leaking behind the wall, it's probably the toilet. So there's easy ways to test the toilet. You just turn the toilet valve off, right? So you're stacking hypotheses on top of each other to isolate that problem until you get it really narrowed down. And depending on the situation, you may narrow it down more or less based on what it's going to take to fix it.
Okay. So where do you, do you want to go to the next steps, or do you want to give some examples?
That's a good question. Yeah, so different examples would be, so we talked about something that's linear, like plumbing. Sure. You can do the same with electrical, because it's in a line. It starts here, goes there. Something, let's say a computer gremlin you're having, you can't test it in a linear way, so you're gonna have to test it some other way. So I would start thinking about what the most likely hypothesis is for the issue you're having with it, and then go from there. If there's ways that you can isolate it, if there's ways that you can, disconnect a whole bunch of different, let's say there's a buzzing on your audio, maybe you can start disconnecting anything that's not related to that audio, and see if it goes away. Kind of like an elimination diet, right?
Yep.
You're sick and you're trying to figure out why. You remove everything, and then you start plugging things back in, or eating things, in that case, until you notice the problem start happening again. Then you can be pretty assured that it's one of those things that you were working on. However, in some cases, it can be multiple things. So you might actually find that it's two things that are plugged into your computer at once give you a buzzing sound, and that one's harder. There's like a multiple of complexity when you start having two things that create an issue as opposed to just one simple thing.
I got a couple of questions here from the audience. I think this one for sure would be a good example. Let's start with this one here from Haas. What's the hardest thing you've ever troubleshooted, or oddest, or most difficult, whatever you want to call it?
One was this plumbing example I'm giving was actually one of the hardest.
Okay.
Because I have a client who it's probably a 1,500 foot long run of underground pipe from the top of their hill, which is almost a mountain, where there's a spring, all the way down to their house. And it had been neglected for like 20 years.
Oh.
And there's all these buried and hidden valves and reducers. It was like a week-long job with an excavator and putting in new valves and new boxes to access those valves, and using a compressor to blow air back, and putting in cleanouts and all kinds of stuff. That one was really hard, just because the people who had put it together hadn't engineered it for somebody to be able to troubleshoot it.
Right.
And that's maybe, I guess, a point. I don't even have it on my notes.
I was going to say, I don't think so, but that is a good point.
Yeah.
That's great.
So when I was in the cable business, I eventually made it to doing like system maintenance and fiber splicing. And if you've ever seen the inside of a fiber optic container, it's like hair-sized spaghetti.
Yes.
Is essentially the best way to describe it. That's somewhat distinguishable colors, but it's pretty tough. And so what I would always say to the technicians, because I would project manage for these things, is put that case back together like you were going to be the next person in it. Like splice your fibers like you were going to have to go in there tomorrow and move something. Because what if they weren't thinking that way? If they're thinking, oh, it's the next person's problem, or I'm trying to get this done as quickly as possible, they'd slap the thing back together, and then we'd literally have to like take down internet and TV for a town to like to redo something later because it was a giant mess. And so thinking about how you engineering something or putting something together in a way that you can access it later if you need to repair something. And if you had to repair something, there's a good likelihood that that's a failure point, and you're going to have to get back there to repair it again.
Good reason why you're never supposed to bury a junction box in electrical.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Many years ago, we had an old house, and all of a sudden, half the lights on a circuit stopped working.
Mm-hmm.
And this was new to me. And so I started digging, and I used the elimination method like you. I worked my way back. I'm like, okay, well, what is working? What isn't working past it? And it turned out it was a plug that maybe hadn't been connected properly and maybe got overloaded, and it blew the wire off. So it opened the circuit for the rest of the circuit. Mm-hmm. But everything worked before that. And it took me, I bet you, a week to figure that out. But I was green, so.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I know I've had other really hard ones, but at the moment I'm struggling to think of them.
That's okay. Haas said his biggest fear is electrical stuff, always afraid of getting electrocuted.
Yeah, I mean, because when you're troubleshooting it, you to some extent you have to have it on, right? So
yep.
That's a valid thing to be concerned about. And what I say, as a home inspector, I talk to a lot of clients, a lot of people who are buying homes. And I'll tell them, like, please have an electrician do this unless you are very, very competent and aware of what you're doing, but you're taking on a risk because, you can get killed from electrical, especially if you're touching with both your hands. Ground, one hand on ground, one hand on it. It goes right through your heart, the electrical path. So yeah, it's something to be concerned about.
I'll ask you one more question. We'll get back to the stuff here. But Haas wanted to know also, what kind of equipment do you recommend for troubleshooting?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Of course, it depends on what you're troubleshooting, right?
Sure.
If it's electrical, you'll probably want things like a circuit tester.
Yeah.
You can get circuit tracers. So Klein makes a circuit tracer where you plug it in and you can actually trace it back to your circuit panel, and you can figure out which circuit it is. Stray volt detector, ohm meter or voltmeter, so you can see if there's continuity between different things. So there's a lot of answers to that, and those are just a couple things you might want if you're troubleshooting electrical, but it really depends on what you're troubleshooting. So if you want to clarify further, if you've got like a specific circumstance, I'd be happy to elaborate on that.
So let's take a plumbing, for instance, and you've isolated, you've worked your way back, and you figure, okay, the problem is most likely with the toilet. What's the next step from there?
Well, there's a few ways to test the toilet. You might shut off the valve to the toilet. There's like a blue dye you can put in the tank. Okay. And so if it's leaking, it'll run into the bowl, and you'll see the bowl turn blue when you don't flush it. So that can give you some indications. And then once you figure out that, let's say you figure out it's leaking, then the next thing you need to do is determine what the fix is going to be, or what fix you're going to try first. Now with the toilet, generally you can kind of look at it and see, it's the float valve that's bad, or it's some part within it that's corroded away and broken or something like that. So in some ways, a toilet's fairly easy once you've determined that that's what's leaking, because you can visually see most of the components inside.
Sure.
But you might just, instead of fixing the exact broken component, you might want to weigh the cost, right? You might want to think about, if I fix this one component, how much time does that take me? How much money does that cost? And in the case of a toilet, you're probably better off replacing the entire float valve component, because they're like $20 and they take 5 minutes to replace, 5-10 minutes to replace. So if you're weighing the cost of what the solution to try is, well, in this case, might as well just replace the whole valve.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Whereas, let's say it's a vehicle and you're like, it's an engine problem. Well, you might start with something like, a spark plug that's easily reachable because you think there's a misfire in a given cylinder. It makes sense because a spark plug's easy, it's inexpensive, right? So even if it might be a 20% chance that that's what the problem is, it's a really easy thing to swap out and test. So you might as well start there. So there's a way of weighing it, and the 4 factors that I consider when I'm weighing out where to start with is, what's the first one by far is, what's the probability of the thing? So how likely is it that this actual thing that I'm looking at is the problem?
Sure. Because
when you get to the end of your troubleshooting, you might have a 80% chance that that's a problem, or maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but figuring out that probability is really important. Then thinking about how much time it's going to take you to fix the thing that you think is the problem, that high probability thing. Then cost for parts, and then risk to damage to the thing or to yourself or to your home. So you kind of weigh all of those things together to determine where you want to start as far as the repair is concerned.
I've cost myself a bit of money over the years thinking I'm going to solve something and then burning something or blowing something out instead. So
let the magic smoke out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that a few times.
With probability, do you? So there's a difference between the easiest thing to do and the most likely thing to do. Hey,
Right. Yeah, you've got it.
so because sometimes a person likes to take the shortcut, and you're like, well, this is the easy thing. I'll try that first, right?
Right.
Have you ever run into that?
Sure. Yeah,
Or
like
you
I was
think-
saying, like the spark plug is the easy solution, so I might try that first. And that one's not going to bite you in the butt. Worst case scenario, you get a new spark plug.
Right.
Let's say somebody's got a roof leak and they're like, I'm just going to put Flex Seal on it. And they put Flex Seal on it and they're like, it stopped leaking. It's good. Well, maybe.
Right.
But think about how long is that going to last? Did that Flex Seal just cause a problem so that when you want to do the proper fix, now it's in the way? Did the Flex Seal push the water a different direction so now it's running down inside a wall where currently you don't see it, but in 6 months when the termites eat up where all that moisture was and that wall collapses? That's extreme, but you know what I mean, right? It's that quick fix or that thing that we think is the easy route. Sometimes it's the right thing. Sometimes there's really no risk in taking that easy route. And other times it's a really bad decision.
So, how about risk? Because, like I said, beyond money, sometimes you can damage some things. You ever had anything maybe go sideways, or or maybe have you ever decided not to do a fix because the risk was too high for the reward?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got an easy example is I've got a phone that I use just for taking videos for my businesses.
Okay.
And for putting out content. I had to take it out of the case a few weeks ago and I dropped it.
Oh, of course.
And so it cracked the screen and it's kind of working. It's kind of not. But the reality is if I bought a new screen for it and tried to put it on, it's one of those phones where the screen's really difficult to replace.
Yeah.
And there's a high likelihood I'd just kill the phone. So my real options at this point are keep using the phone as is and hope it works, but have everything backed up, or buy a new phone.
Right.
So yeah, there's too high of a risk in replacing that screen that it just doesn't make sense. Another example might be doing roof repairs on a roof that you don't have proper ladders for and is too high of a pitch.
Good point.
I've known plenty of people who have fallen off of roofs and been injured for the rest of their lives because they were trying to do a fix for a couple $100 less than the roofer would do for them, trying to save a few bucks, and they did bodily harm. So there's a lot of ways to weigh risk. That actually brings up an interesting point though. When getting back to the dumpster diving,
Yeah.
there wasn't much risk in me fixing that Nintendo because if I broke it, I just put it back in the trash, right?
Right.
The computer I'm talking to you on right now, I literally pulled out of a dumpster, and with a couple other computers, I put together a pretty decent computer that I can edit video on. It's literally cost me $0. The webcam I'm using right now is something that somebody thought didn't work. It's as long as you're willing to deal with a few hiccups. But my point being, you can try risky things on something that didn't cost you anything.
Sure.
So I've let the magic smoke out of many laptops,
Yep.
or many things that I was trying to, like USB things. I was trying to use. Here's an example. Those free lights you get from Harbor Freight. Have you ever seen those?
Yep. Yeah.
They're little blue lights, and they work on like 3.7 volts, I think.
Yep.
And I'm like, I wonder if this would work off of a USB battery pack and just be a bit brighter, right, at 5 volts. And it did. It worked for about an hour, and then it died permanently. But it was a free little light, and it was an extra USB cable that was already damaged. So I lost nothing except for 10 minutes of putting it together and trying it. So finding something with low risk is useful.
So it's, I guess you could kind of look at money and risk as two sides of a teeter-totter.
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, a big risk and very little money, you're good, or a big risk and you could save a lot of money might be worth it too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Finances ties into it. And like I said, there's when you're weighing those costs is the way I put it. It's kind of like one of those four-way teeter-totters, you know, where you're trying to figure out all these different things at once and trying to balance them to make a decision as to which way to go next.
So somebody that comes to you, well, okay. Anyway, it's not story time for Tim tonight, but I remember when
That's okay. I want to hear your stories too.
I worked at a computer shop. I've told this story a bunch, but you know, I never knew how to troubleshoot, and they said just keep trying things. You know, that's all it is. Just keep trying shit until you figure something out, right? And then you get a little bit better and a little bit better as time goes on. But you know, there's going to be lots of different people listening to this. So the people that just have never really done troubleshooting before, how do you start? How do you get over the fear of it? What's a good kind of entry level troubleshooting for people that feel like they can't do it, even though we know they can?
Good question. Gardening is a good one because you're it's a natural system.
Okay.
And you're gonna run into problems, right? But they're plants and they're generally annuals, so if you kill them, you know, you learn something, right? Try again next year. So gardening's kind of in some ways, it's a jump off point for that. And there's so many resources out there, then you can go, okay, what did I do wrong? And your brain, the incredible thing about our brains is they make connections. And to me, that's what computers can't do, even the new AI and things, is they don't make these disparate connections where I see something going on and I'm able to, as I learn about it, I'm actually able to pull in other information from totally disconnected fields or practices and see how that relates in an analogous way. So, you know, I think really anything you do that you could fail at, you're going to learn from those failures. That's where taking those, you know, low risks, at least to start with, is, or maybe it's a higher risk, but with a low financial penalty, is really, really helpful, because now you can take a bigger risk, see what happens, and learn something from it.
I've always liked taking old things, tearing them apart, and seeing what makes them tick.
Yeah.
I never realized that's why I did it, but you know, I've broke lots of things, but there's many things I just didn't bring back to life, but I learned something every time I tore something apart.
Yeah, I mean, what kid in the 90s didn't tear apart some VCR that stopped working, right?
Oh yeah.
Or that swallowed every tape. You're like, okay, well, nobody's using this again. Let's see how this thing works. And
I loved it.
Yeah. I learned a lot about capacitors because I got shocked really badly by one.
I believe you. That's a good example, man.
Yeah, as a 12-year-old, I had a TV, and I think the circuit board was broken.
Okay.
So when it warmed up, it would turn itself off.
Sure.
And I figured out that if I kind of wedged like a screwdriver up in there just right, it would keep the board from bowing where that crack was, and it would keep the TV on. Well, every once in a while, you'd have to move the screwdriver. And as a kid, I wasn't smart enough to unplug the TV and then hit the power button to discharge all the capacitors. So I got hit by a capacitor pretty bad, and I'm like, oh, that's a capacitor. That's so I started learning electronic components by doing stupid stuff. And the reality is that's what kids are doing. You see kids do stupid stuff, and sometimes it's because they're copying somebody, but a lot of times it's because they're willing to take risks to learn how the physical world works in a way that we're no longer willing to. A really interesting example of this was there's these, they took a computer in a remote village in Africa. I think it had like Ubuntu or something on it, like a Linux operating system. Yeah. And they just stuck it out there in the middle of the town. And they came back like, I don't know, it was like a month later or something. And there's these kids who are doing rudimentary programming on it. Like they're changing code within this computer to make it do what they wanted to. And so they sat down and asked the kids, like, how did you figure this out? And they basically said, we just started clicking on things.
Sure.
Right? So they just started messing with it, and they weren't afraid of breaking it, because to them it didn't really have any value other than being an odd thing that was dropped off in their village. And so they just, in their kids, so they don't really weigh that. And so they just started playing with it until they figured it out. So in a way, their brain is making these really interesting connections that that we wouldn't think of, because they're taking this risk at breaking something that, somebody else might put value on, but they only did in what they could do with it. And if they didn't learn something to do with it, it had no value anyways.
One of my favorite things to watch on YouTube is vintage electronics. So one of my favorite YouTubers, his name's Techmoan. He's I don't know, probably maybe late 50s, early 60s out of Britain. And he gets all these obscure, he really does a lot of like obscure audio formats and things. And he'll buy like even just mini systems, like CD, tape, whatever from the early 90s. And, the rubber's completely rotted off the wheels already, anything like that. And a lot of times he'll buy, like on eBay, it says for parts only, test it, not working. He'll buy a lot of that stuff, and he'll make videos out of trying to fix it. And what I love is he explains his process, but if it's a complete and utter failure, he doesn't delete it and not do a video on it. He shows when he flubs up too, Yeah,
that's awesome. And one of the things that I recommend is for people to watch YouTube videos, but obviously do it with a grain of salt.
Right.
Because there's a lot of bad information out there too. And be on the lookout for it. Have your BS meter on when you're watching it, because you can learn things from somebody suggesting something that's dumb, because now again you're not invested emotionally in it. Right. So you can go, that doesn't sound quite right. And try to figure it out as they go through it. So as long as you're not taking everything as gospel on the videos you watch, it can be a tremendous resource to kind of short circuit the troubleshooting side of things.
Do you have any YouTubers you like, or people that you turn to quite often when you want to learn some of that stuff?
I can't say that I do, because most of the YouTube I watch these days is stuff with my kids at night. It's
nice. Yeah.
We don't really do TV, but they have a few channels they really enjoy, and they're all like, I don't know, grown-ups blowing stuff up or doing things like that. So I'm okay with it. It's entertaining enough for me. So no, I don't watch much YouTube or anything like that anymore. But I mean, you can dig and find, and I'd love to promote people here, but I don't have anybody that I watch regularly.
I've got a bunch, I can't remember, but This Old House is awesome.
Yeah.
They have, I mean, that show's been around since probably before we were kids, or pretty close to it. And there's just, every time I want to do something, when I decided I was going to run gas lines from my house to my garage, and I never blew anything up, never had any leaks, but a lot of what I did came from This Old House videos. And they're, they'll have 10 or 15 minute. There was a great video on how to put a barbecue outlet on the outside of your home, tapping into your existing line, that kind of stuff. So you start with there. Yeah. I like This Old House anyway. They're really good.
No, I totally agree with you. So I put out a report when I do a home inspection.
Okay.
That goes to the client, and I'll have like the deficiencies or the problems with the house. One of the most common problems with the house is not having downspout extensions.
Yeah.
And so I have a pre-made comment about that actually has a link to a This Old House video on how to put downspout extensions in, and how to do things like, like rain gardens and things like that as like an auxiliary, just an added piece to my home inspection that makes it kind of stand out. But sure. This Old House is a great show, and their information is great.
So I thought of this a few minutes ago, but so you're a home inspector. What have you ever seen some really poor attempts at troubleshooting or fixing problems?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm trying to think of some recent ones. I had a person add their own electrical.
Like another panel, or like?
Yes.
Oh boy. Okay.
So
how'd that go?
All right. So I'll try to break this down in more layman's terms, make it as simple as possible. But generally speaking, you've got a main breaker panel.
Yep.
And then beyond that, you may have what's called a sub panel, which is basically another breaker panel that piggybacks on the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So wires are gauged for the amount of amperage that they can carry.
Yes.
And the first sub panel, so main panel and then sub panel, that first sub panel had a wire that was gauged for 90 amps or rated for 90 amps.
Okay.
Well, somebody decided to turn a detached garage into an apartment with full-fledged everything. So like electric water heater, HVAC, and they ran it off this first sub panel. They ran a second sub panel off of it. And so now you're running basically probably 120 plus amps off of just generally speaking, but up to 200 amps off of a 90 amp sub panel.
Right,
and,
because you got a bottleneck there.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a bottleneck, so you've got a wire that's gauged way too small, and apparently the breaker wasn't turning off. And it did once. I talked to the client, or the homeowner. When I told him because it was a fire risk, so I told the homeowner about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, there's this one time it tripped, and I went out and turned it back on, but it's really hot." I'm like, that didn't. Anyways, so he had put in his own additional electrical, and inside the box, that wire, like where they had tied on, they had done a splice, and it was just burnt to a crisp, and all the insulator was burnt off the conductor, and there's all these like ground wires like a couple millimeters from the conductor where if you touched anything it would short to this thing. So, and it had a breaker that wasn't breaking when it was supposed to. So stuff like that, yeah, there's some really sketchy, scary stuff.
Not to go too far into the weeds, but what do you think caused because to me, the scariest thing of all of that is that breaker that wasn't breaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, I mean, it all sucks, but if that breaker did its job, it would have prevented a fire. Any idea what was causing that breaker not to trip?
Yeah, I have a suspicion. There's these little lockout tabs that you can buy for panels where when you're working on the electrical, you can flip that tab and put a lock on it to keep it from turning back on. Well, in some cases, those actually will sit and hold the breaker on. So you can close them in a way that holds the breaker on instead of holding the breaker off.
Sure.
And there was one installed on one of the other breakers, and I think it may have been previously installed on that 90 amp breaker. So yeah, you're right. It's a little in the weeds.
That's
but
okay.
I do think that they had basically bypassed the breaker's ability to trip.
I'll bet you, here's, dude says one time it tripped. Mm-hmm. I bet you it tripped a bunch of times. And he put that on there because he's like, well, this damn thing keeps tripping. I'll solve that. It's the old trick of putting a penny in the fuse slot,
Right.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what they did. Oh, my goodness.
On my house in Minnesota, so this is before I was an inspector, but I had worked with a master electrician in college, so I knew enough about electrical at that point.
Sure.
My HVAC there was old enough that it was fused.
Yep.
And somebody had removed the fuses and cut 1/2-inch copper pipe to fit where the fuses went as shunts. So, yeah.
Love it. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh wow. There's I get it. I know it was a thing that was done.
Yeah. So another one that I see is bad decks here.
Okay.
So there's no There's building codes in most counties, but they're very rarely enforced, and most people don't bother pulling codes.
Sure.
And there's some counties that don't have codes. But decks are the thing that everybody puts on themselves. And there's several decks in the area that I've seen that are like, they're cantilevered, or not even cantilevered. They're just like, they've got these angled brackets going up, and they're not connected properly to the house. They're basically nailed to the house. So if you can imagine the physics of that, if you put any weight on the end, it would just basically pull away from the house.
Sure.
And so it's completely inappropriate. And I can just imagine somebody being out there for a barbecue and it collapses. There was one where I was doing an inspection for somebody, and they were buying, it was a property to totally reno.
Okay.
And there was a deck on the back, and I'm like, this deck is about to collapse. And so we were walking on it that day, which I don't know why. We just, like, I got to the bottom and I'm like, oh, that's about to collapse. So he bought the house, and I went back with him, and I stuck a pry bar behind one of the joists, and barely pushed on, just nudged it a tiny bit, and the whole deck just fell down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I could go on for hours about horror stories.
You ever seen the YouTube video where the guy is hand bombing package of shingles onto his deck? And so he's it looks like a lift and a half of asphalt shingles on his deck.
Wow.
And the dude, it's a second story deck, and he steps up, slams that next one down on the lift, and the whole thing, deck and everything go down. I think he was okay, but anyway.
That's awful.
So other than YouTube, what else can a person do to get better at troubleshooting? What kind of resources and stuff?
Books are great, of course.
Okay.
If you like reading books, if you like Audible, there's tons of books that are, whether it's like a prepper novel where it's somebody that's actually well written, or whether it's, nonfiction and it's a how-to. I've listened to a lot of books on like gardening or homesteading where I'm like, I don't even really like their approach, but I listen to it anyways just to get ideas.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's the same part of our brain that puts together the ideas that will work, that also troubleshoots the things that are broken. And so if you're constantly exercising that part of your brain by listening or reading, those are super helpful. Another is have friends who are experts, right? Yeah. Reach out to them. Before you try that fix, go through the steps of isolating it and trying to determine what it is first, but then call a friend who is an expert. I put together a system for a client, and I wanted to know, will this work, basically? So I sent it off to Sean Mills because he's an expert, right?
Sure.
So it's great to have friends who are experts, and using them as a resource is a really good way to do things.
Don't let Sean hear that because it'll go to his head. So,
well, he's now making a Kickstarter based on.
He's coming on Thursday night.
Yeah.
It's gonna. I'm excited to hear about it, man.
That's so. I know he had a lot of other questions on the same topic. But that was the topic that I had sent to him. Was I was trying to design a system that was a direct DC solar pump to a tank at the top of the hill to have basically backfed water pressure. So
nice.
Yeah.
So all right, let's finish up on this one. This is a good one with Haas. What do you? Yeah. We can go as far in the weeds with this as you want, but it's a comment / question, but I wonder if AI can troubleshoot, and I'm gonna expand it a little bit. And do you think at some point AI will be developed to a point where it can troubleshoot?
Sure. I think AI can probably troubleshoot it to some extent, especially with our ability to re-ask questions, essentially. So right now you can give AI a legal document and say, explain this to me simply, right? So AI is able to break down more complex issues. So I imagine that at least for certain things, it would be able to, if you were to ask it, this is happening, what's the most likely scenario? Or it may be able to spit out probabilities for you. So in that sense, it could certainly help. I don't know how far it can go. I've never tried it, but it's an interesting question.
I kind of see it like, remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yeah.
Where you just kept, I don't know if you ever did this, but you just kept, I'd keep flipping back and making the choice until I got the ending I wanted sometimes.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if you could, kind of with AI, you just keep asking the questions, because the cool thing is, and I love ChatGPT. Now, do I think lots of things can go hairy and sideways with it? Sure. Lots of things went hairy and sideways with the internet. Yet here we sit, two people 3,000 miles apart talking about troubleshooting. So it's still a pretty cool thing, right?
Yeah.
So AI has this access to everything. And what I like about it is it's really added an intelligence to searching. Mm-hmm. Because before, especially the last few years, everybody said it, Google's been kind of broken.
Yeah.
It actually, maybe I'm, old man yelling at clouds, but I remember, 10 years ago, you could type in something you wanted to learn about in Google, and the first few results would be like, forum posts of somebody who solved it. And now it's, 8 suggested sites because of Google ads, and then whatever else somebody has worked to the top because of, not scamming, but figuring out the system, right?
Right.
So what I love about AI, like you said, is the ability to keep asking it questions to pare down what you want. Mm-hmm. And for me, when I do things like the history of prepping episodes, the first few I did took maybe, 16 hours to put together. And with ChatGPT, the last one was less than 8 hours, because what it does is it got me to the source really quick. Mm-hmm. It saved me filtering through, 90% bullshit to get to the stuff that really, the meat of it, right? And it understands what I want. It's an intelligent search. So I guess it's a long way to beat around the bush. I wonder if at some point, I think it's probably there a bit, but with some tweaking, if you could sit in front of something and kind of describe what you're dealing with, and I think you could probably do it now, but I bet you we're only a few years away from it being able to really, the idea I always thought about, it would be nice to have like a call your own handyman kind of service.
Right.
And I'm wondering if at some point AI is going to be able to do that for us.
Yeah, I think one of the limitations with AI right now is actually how and what we ask it.
Right.
At least to an extent, which is a limitation of the AI to not be able to figure out and draw connections to certain things. Because you or I asking each other the same question may be able to figure out on inference or on, facial cues or whatever else.
Yeah.
But I think that, let's say in the future we've got some AI where you can actually point a camera at the thing and say, this isn't working. Well, you might not know how to say what a air exchanger is on your HVAC, right? Or a heat exchanger on your HVAC is. You might not know the term for that, but you might be able to point at it with the AI and go, what is that? And then once you know what it's called, you go, okay, what can go wrong with a heat exchanger on on an HVAC system? So it may be that as these things become a little less sandboxed, that you'd be able to do some things like that with it. I'm, as many people are, I'm kind of leery of how it's going. I agree with Spirko, I think most of your followers probably at least have some awareness of him. He's been talking about AI recently and don't get left behind. It's like the geezer who's sitting there going, that internet thing is never going to amount to anything. So I get that on one hand. I'm looking forward to decentralized AI because my concern here is exactly what you were talking about with Google. Google is useless. And not only is Google useless, every single search engine that you use, with the exception of maybe like Yahoo, is using the Google crawler to pull its information. So yes, DuckDuckGo might be more private, and it might not be trying to manipulate you by the results it gives you, but it's still pulling those results from Google, and they're still pretty much useless. And I was talking about the condition that I have or had earlier that really kind of started me down this road. And today I couldn't find the information I would need to figure out what was going on with me.
I bet. And if you could, how far down would it be buried? Right. It's an interesting, I kind of hope this, if nothing else, it really does turn it. And my mind's going all over the place, but I'm thinking here, you point it, when you get to the point of pointing a camera at it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it also has audio sensors. And if it's making a funny noise, maybe it can hear that noise and say, hey, I have a suggestion for what it might be.
Right.
Or the camera might be able to see hot spots on the electrical or on the HVAC and say, hey, guess what? This third green wire up here is 5 degrees hotter than anything else. That's probably where your problem is.
Yeah.
And in 2005, I started at the hardware store. A year later, somebody came in with a phone that had a digital camera on it. And it was the first time anybody had ever come into the store with a, hey, here's a picture of my plumbing. What's wrong with it?
Yeah.
What is that? 17 years ago. And look where we might be pretty quick.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of uses for it. And just like anything else, I really like doing certain things old school enough to know them. Right. Yes. Like, I'm going to be teaching a chicken processing class in a couple of weeks here. We're going to have the participants go through and actually pluck chickens at least one chicken by hand, because, if they actually need to do it, and this is a crap hits the fan situation, they're going to be prepared for that, and they're going to understand, okay, this is the amount of strength it should take to pull these feathers off, and they don't come off, so I need to rescald it or whatever. They're going to have that skill set if they don't have a plucker sitting around. And I think that when we rely on something like AI or rely on technology in certain ways, it leaves giant holes in our ability and our understanding for something. So hopefully, those of us who are kind of keen on that can use AI in a good way, but I'd really love to see it decentralized, because I don't want to see what happened to Google and our search engine and the internet in general happen to AI.
Didn't think you were going to come on and talk about AI tonight, did you?
Didn't expect it, no.
It's the best part of the show, man. I love it. We covered everything there was to do about troubleshooting, and we still had a meaningful conversation about the downfall of human civilization due to artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, right.
The potential downfall, because it is what it is, right? But
right.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. No,
I was just going to say, one of my concerns about AI, to get off on a little bit of a rabbit hole or tangent or whatever, is I'm concerned that it's going to be more, not that AI itself will take things over, but that those who wish to control will say, AI said we should do this because it causes the least harm. And it has nothing to do with AI, or it's an AI that they programmed. But, it's not actually the best thing to do. It's just, we're now saying we've conditioned people to think that AI can calculate better than us. So as long as they say that AI said, this is the right way to govern, or this is the right way to, do this thing, now everybody's going to do it.
It's the wizard behind the curtain, or big brother, right?
Yep.
It's you just keep using that as the example and don't worry about the rest.
Yeah. That's at least for the short term, that's more concern for me than almost anything else AI wise.
I dig it, man. I feel you. I really do. I guess where I come from, I'm like, I see all the bad shit. It's probably going to happen. I'm like, well, let's figure out how I can use it for me, and I won't worry about the bad, because the bad's going to happen either way, right? So.
Yeah. No, I agree. I tend to be a little bit, I can't think of the word at the moment, but I like to be cautious about what I'm, it's almost like I'm putting my signature on something if I'm using it if that
Yep.
makes sense. Like,
Sure.
I know that my training of Chat GPT, if I used it, is going to be a blip on the radar. Not even that. But I have some ethical quandaries with, giving information and training something that could be used so poorly. So I don't know. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not exactly sure where I land on all that.
It's had a great idea. I've had Andy Higginbotham on a few times. Do you know Andy?
I don't.
No, he does the cooking at some of the cooking at LFTN and Self Reliance.
Oh yeah, okay. I didn't know his last name. Yes, I know.
Oh yeah,
Andy.
yeah,
Yeah.
awesome dude, and just made me think we should do a roundtable episode on AI. I think
Yeah.
that would be. I think that'd be a great idea. You brought me. We went down a rabbit hole that it's always a lot of fun. There's something about these bleeding edge tech that I don't know, just gets a person's eyes to light up a little bit, even if it
Yeah.
is scary as shit.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting, right? I actually really enjoy technology. I just hate what it's being used for.
I get you. I mean, we all love guns, but there's times that they're used for an awful thing.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean we need to ban them. Just means we need to have them and be careful with how we use them. Right? That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the same argument is true for, let's say, property, right?
Yeah.
When people give me an objection about, say, Bitcoin, I'm like, well, yeah, some world controller, maybe central banks are buying it up to use it, but isn't that same as property? I mean, BlackRock's buying up property, but do you think property is evil in and of itself? And so it depends on how it's being used. It depends on how you approach it.
I mean, people can use a pencil to write the greatest novel in the world, or they can do the Joker in the Dark Knight and make the pencil disappear. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
come on. It's an innate object, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
Well, brother, this has been a good episode. Thank you.
Yeah.
You promote your stuff. Let us know. Sell your stuff. No, I mean, but let us know how can people either way, home inspection, Homestead Consultant. What can they follow up with you to give you money?
Sure. Well, I'll take money.
Me too.
Thanks so much for having me on, Tim. This has been an awesome conversation. It's been a lot of fun. So if you're in Tennessee, I can do a home inspection for you. I'm mostly just about middle Tennessee. So I travel a couple of hours. I'd love to help you out if you're somebody moving to Tennessee who just needs references. If you need a good real estate agent, want to talk about where's a good place to move for the things you want to do. Those are all things I love. Thanks, Hoss. But that's really what I can do on the home inspection side. And then on the homestead consultant side, basically I help people figure out how to set up their homesteads in a way that makes sense, in a way that's very conducive for their lifestyle. So I really take into consideration their land, the resources that they have, the time that they have, what they're wanting to do, and try to get them connected with other local people who can help them out and things. So that's kind of what I do. My websites are I've got clarityhomeinspection.com, so that's my home inspection, and then the homesteadconsultant.com is my consultancy webpage. I've got all my prices, all my information up on there, and kind of explains the different packages. So basically I work with anybody in Tennessee, Southern Kentucky. I can actually do on-site stuff. I do distance consults too. So I've worked with people in Wisconsin and Illinois and in several other states. But I can't be as specific. I can't be quite as helpful without being on site. If people want to see my videos, I kind of started all this by putting together a place called Love Farm. It's with a friend, and she had a property that she wasn't doing anything with. So we just kind of started working together. And since I didn't have the consulting business at the time, I started a YouTube channel based on that farm. So if you want to find my videos, I do a lot of like homestead hacks and information on clever ways to do different things on your homestead inexpensively or more easily. That's over at youtube.com and then /@lovefarmtn. I think I gave you the wrong URL, Tim. That was an old
Well, that's
one.
okay. We'll fix it up.
Yeah, so I got to get my own custom URL recently. So yeah, that's at Love Farm TN on YouTube. You can there's good content on there. I'm always trying to put extra stuff up there, but that's my stuff.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I got all the links in all the places to be in the podcast description going out tonight as well. And yeah, it's in the live stream replay here for you too. So yeah, are you cool with hanging on in the background for a second while I close her up?
Absolutely.
Right, I'll be right
Thanks so
back.
much, Tim.
Thank you. Like I said, guys, you need to know all of Ryan's stuff is in the links in the description tonight. You know what? It's cool. Ryan and I started with just, I'm not even sure. Okay. I do remember this story, and I'm going to tell this right quick about Ryan, because when I reached out to people to do that original collaboration, the only requirement I had was that people were putting out regular content. It didn't matter how many subscribers or anything else. And I looked, I said, look at that. Ryan is he's doing some cool stuff. And look what he's turned it into 3 years later. So for what it's worth, man, I'm proud of him. I love seeing entrepreneurs do shit like that. But the reason I say that is he's worth you supporting. So if you need Homestead Consulting, which I think is a cool business, and you can tell that's his passion, that's the thing that makes his eyes light up. Give him some support, guys. So that's it for me this evening. Do not forget, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, I got Mr. Donaldson coming on from Preparedness Labs, Jeff Donaldson. I'm quite excited about that. So it's an odd time, but if you hear this announcement before tomorrow morning, drop by. He'll really appreciate having some people in the audience to ask some questions. And with that, guys, you know I always appreciate you. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.